Did you know that the anti-vertex relates to the ascendant in astrology? This is because ascendant literally means rising. We call this the rising sign, right? And there has been implicitly this connotation of separation from the eastern horizon. So the signs that are separating at the moment of our birth, we say, that sign is our rising sign. Now, rising just means lifting up, right? So does ascend, to ascend. So the ascendant is the sign that's rising above the earth. Now, there's been much agreement upon that, right, as a concept. Although the term rising is a bit ambiguous, just like the term midheaven or middle of the sky, the medium coli. So this is because when we're talking about the anti-vertex and how it relates to the rising, that the anti-vertex is always the point on the ecliptic that's intersecting the most eastern point relative to you, marked by astronomically what we call the prime vertical. So if I just show you this, this is the line going up directly from the east. And right now we'll see if this is Cancer starting here, right here. This would be Gemini and this would be Taurus. And we would see Taurus would have the maximum ascent, right? And we'll see that although right now we have Cancer rising, we're not going to see Cancer hit full ascensional speed until it hits the east. And so let me play this back for you so we can see this happen. So we'll see because Cancer rises so far north, it rises so close to what's called the nadir or the IC in astrology that by the time it rises, it still has a ways to go to get that ascensional speed. So now let's speed it up and see this process. So right now Cancer is rising over the horizon. We'd say that that is now the rising sign, but it still has a ways to go before we get to the east. And we'll see by the time it gets to the east, it's still going to have a ways to rise because this is in between the north and the south, right? Such that this is in between anti-culmination and culmination, which is why it gets that sense of rising speed before now, when it hits the south, it'll start to culminate and then fall down again. So if I go back to right now, we'll see the same picture at the east. Cancer is rising, but again, we have Taurus on this point directly east. So let me show you what the chart for that would look like. All right, so this is the sign, or this is the chart of the moment right now. So we'll see, just like as presented in the astronomical view, we see Cancer as the rising, right? And we see the vertex down here and the anti-vertex up there in Taurus. So this is how we would see this in a chart, right? This point would be the east, and this would be the west, although we're still rising and setting in Cancer very far skewed to the north, and then over here in Capricorn we're setting very far skewed towards the south. So yeah, so that's just really interesting because it shows that or it's just another point in astrology that can show rising significations, right? And we also see that although Cancer's rising, there's sort of this almost aspirational component in that it's still coming up, right? It still hasn't reached that peak rising force, right? So that's just really interesting. And we see similar things when we look into the MC versus the 10th equal house from the rising and how those points are slightly similar. Or different, but can show similar themes, just like the anti-vertex and the rising. So yeah. So in conclusion, although the rising sign is the sign separating from the horizon and thus has risen into the viewable sky, there are in instances like especially Cancer and Capricorn rising, because they're so skewed from rising due east, that there's going to be a different sign, especially if you're far north or far south on the globe, that is actually rising or setting the fastest, right? Actually has that fastest speed, ascensional or descensional speed, right? So let me know if you guys have noticed anything with your vertex and anti-vertex signs, and let me know if you realize that this is the astronomical significance of the vertex, because it is pretty interesting and not so widely talked about.